This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation, with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Writer Life. Today I'm going to talk about living in the moment. And it's something that's been sort of kind of triggered in my mind recently, because a few days ago I sat with my dad and we talked. Now, I'm really lucky because over the years we've had lots of great in-depth discussions about life, politics, mental and physical health, relationships, and of course, writing. He writes poetry. Some of it is quite funny, some of it is very deep and emotive, and a lot of it is based on his perceptions of the world around him. I think in many ways we are quite similar that way, as I take what I see and what I hear from the world that surrounds me, and I create stories which, albeit fictional, they're always based on some form of truth. You know, he expresses his through rhyme. I express mine by writing chapter after chapter after chapter. I publish my dad's stuff, so together we are both authors, working in different genres of writing, but nevertheless, we both share a writer's life. I hope at some point I can get some of our conversations recorded, because they really are fascinating, especially considering he spent most of his working life in the mental health profession, which is actually another thing that we share, as we've been sat as counsellors and done our best to help people who've got stuck in life. I've got a lot of respect for my dad. He really is a very clever guy, and he's very, very well read. So when it comes to sounding out ideas or looking at life, you know, for me personally, he is a safe place to go and get some really good inspiration and insights. I really do admire him deeply, and I treasure the conversations that we have, of which I can say many last well over 3 hours. And they are really, really very detailed sorts of conversations as we bounce our thoughts and ideas off each other. Now, unfortunately, last December, he had a stroke, which paralysed a great deal of his left side. And I cannot deny that, you know, for myself, it was a difficult and very, very turbulent time. He's always been so active and on the ball. So seeing him lay in a bed struggling to talk, with one side of him completely paralysed and frozen, unable to move, I've got to say it was possibly one of the hardest times in my life. The worst thing about strokes is that the recovery is just so agonisingly slow. It takes a great deal of willpower and tenacity to actually overcome one. And for the last 7 months, watching him fight and force himself into some form of recovery has been really difficult for me. But it's also been inspirational. Now I can understand where my bloody-minded powerful willpower comes from now. You know, as I've watched him fight what is a frozen body. And so seeing him, you know, and his limited use of his left arm and actually walking again has for myself been a real revelation and a source of great relief. I love him to bits, and I'm so proud of him. He's without doubt a real hero. And like me, he refuses to quit and forces his way forward, making progress with each passing week. Now this week, when I visited him, we talked about living in the moment. In a sense, I kind of found that a little bit surprising as I listened to him. I suppose, you know, from my side of the fence, growing up in a hippie culture compared to his upbringing during World War II, and what was seen as a very puritanical world, it did really sort of catch me off guard a little, because if I'm honest, it was one conversation I never really expected to have with him. Although, when I think about it, I'm not really sure why. In many ways, I do feel that there is some sort of preconceived notion we all have about the different generations. I grew up almost amongst free-spirited hippies and the rocker biker culture of the 1970s, and he was born in the very conservative, puritanical late 1930s and grew up in the 40s. It's easy to think and feel we are as different as chalk and cheese, and so the concept of being wild and free, living for the moment, which was my youth, I don't think it was something that I naturally thought my dad would understand. And yet, he's also lived a life, so why did it surprise me? There is some sort of mental blockage, I think, at times, where we just look to our parents and think, well, yeah, they're never really going to understand this. We just naturally assume we're different, which when you consider that I'm actually the author of the Curio Chronicles, a series of books that has Ronnie and Hattie as important background characters, you'd think I'd not really be that judgmental. I mean, after all, I'm not as young as I would like to be, and yet I've had long, deeply personal conversations over many years with, much younger people, and I completely understood their life, which is the whole point of the Curios, because it holds up a mirror to society and points out the lack of understanding between each generation. When I first wrote Abigail Summer, I was pretty sure that my dad would hate it. I mean, after all, the book highlights today's modern, sexually fueled, living in the moment hookup culture. It made sense to me that those raised through the 1940s and 50s lived a very different sort of life, especially in regard to courtship. Back then, things were very different. Sex was not talked about, let alone experienced. In most cases, in order to have sex, you had to actually get married first, which is a very stark difference to today's sleep with people first, don't worry about love, and to a degree, treat it like a sport and grab as much as you can sort of culture. I was really surprised when he read the book, which, when he read it, it was actually one of the final draft manuscripts before publication, and he actually loved it. He did add at the end of his praise how he felt some of the language and some of the sexploits of the girls should be left out. I was not that surprised, to be honest. I expected it, and one of the reasons for writing the story was to create a very accurate portrayal of modern youth culture and the more open attitudes towards sex these days. Now, most of this series is based on 25 years of long, deep, personal conversations that shed light on to the kinds of lives the youth were living. And in all of the series, what I write is based on true accounts of things that have been told to me. So for someone like my dad, who was 82 when he read it, I can tell you, it was a real eye-opener for him. Now, we did not completely agree on a few things. He was adamant at the time that I should remove aspects, such as Abigail's moments in the last chapter, which sees her relieve her stress and anxiety straddled over a young man. Abby was 19, and in the next book she'd be 24 years old, and far more sexually active. He did not fully understand that this was my way of preparing the reader for more graphic aspects that would come out in the next book. There's a point, and that I think the relationship at this moment between my dad and myself really started to show, showed its strength. Because, rather than fall out, we talked, which gave me a chance to highlight what I actually feel was the most important aspect of the book, which was highlighting the difference between generations, which was based on a complete lack of understanding between all of them. It's a very real fact that in this day and age there is now a modern trend to grow up liberated and highly sexual, but also adopting something from the past, which I've observed in pretty much every conversation that I've had. And it's kind of weird that we've got this kind of really open liberation, and yet there is like a 1950s morality, which is kind of puritanical, lurking in the background. You see, whereas the younger generations of today may be more sexually promiscuous, they also fear reprisals and attacks on their character. Half of the time they live in the moment, which is mainly sexual, and the other half they live in fear of what others may say about what they get up to. Talking with my dad about living in the moment really hit home hard, because out of everything that I've ever talked about with others, it's the one thing everyone I've had conversations with has worried about the most. Now, when you look at things, I come from a pretty unique generation, which is those that were born from 1964 onwards. I'm kind of, Generation X. We were the new wave following the boomers, and we were raised in the late 60s to 1970s, and to be honest, we were wild, we were liberated, free, and most importantly, we were fearless risk takers who did not really care what others thought. We were Hattie's generation. I think now we're kind of a one-off breed, because it feels some days that the generations that followed us have been slowly watered down and converted to generations of living in their comfort zones, being afraid of just about everything. We did not care. We lived wild, free lives, stuck our finger up to the world and resisted control at all costs. And today it really does show, because as we've got older and allegedly wiser, we've resisted conformity, and we cannot be controlled. And we are still living in the moment and taking the most out of life each and every day. To us, but she's normal, and she's absolutely right. But there again, she was raised by Ronnie and Will, both of whom belong to Gen X, like Hattie does. But she's a very unique character who is intelligent, streetwise. She's also a Wiccan, a naturist, and a training sex therapist. Which can only mean one thing really, which is she's open, she's free, and highly liberated. Now Abigail is more your millennial type. Yeah, she's highly intelligent, but she's also closeted, shy, and very introverted. In a sense, putting her with Birch was like mixing chalk and cheese. Abby is idealistic, but Birch is pragmatic, motivated, and liberated beyond wild. I mean, be honest, it was a match that was always going to never really end well for Wood and Dursley. Their meeting was like adding a flame to a firework. The only result that could be had was to stand well back and just revel in the glory of it. I've had a lot of conversations since writing the Curio series with my dad, many of which have evolved around the themes running through the Curio Chronicles. 3 have been published which he has read, in some cases more than once, and it's been wonderful to see him slowly understand what it is that I've tried to do with this series. Curio Summer, I cannot deny, opened his eyes, and like Abigail's Summer, there were parts he could not accept and did not think should be published, most of which, once again, evolved around language and sexual conduct. Now, I completely get that. I understand his generation, and, I do sit and ponder how different and how shocking some of these books must appear to him on his first reading of them. Curio Summer sees all of the Curios move into the first stages of growing up and their early sexual maturity. And out of all of the books in this series, which, they do calm down with age, Curio Summer is by far the most graphic, as it tears the band-aid completely off and shows the full living truth of how younger generations think and act. The simple truth is, at first look, most people do not completely understand the process. I do. I've worked with many like the Curios, and I've spoken with many that live as they do. The biggest mistake that most people have made when reading is the very real fact that the Curios do live in the moment They make the most of every situation, and for myself as the author, and also an ex-counsellor, I have the chance to really show the good, the bad, and the very ugly and sordid of what a lot of young modern culture can be like. It was deliberate on my part. It was the whole point of the series, showing how we grow up, live a life that is unseen, and then mature. Anyone who is aged 24 may feel like they know it all. I mean, hell, these days, most 14-year-olds do. And that is the point. They think that they do. The real truth is, as the series will reveal, is they simply do not. And they have a lot of bumps in the road to navigate before they really start to wise up and see the world as it truly is. Which the sad truth is, it can be really, really ugly and nasty and a very, very scary place indeed. We live in a modern world which is now driven by media, and that poses a very, very real problem for a lot of people, especially the young. The young today spend a huge chunk of their time on many different forms of social media, and the biggest problem with that is they find themselves drawn into it more and more. Most media is driven through sponsorship and through advertising, of which they get a massive amount of revenue flowing into them from it. Our media is no longer shaped by news, it's shaped by businesses, because it's their revenue that funds the channels and the media platforms. And actually that is a really, really, and very, very dangerous combination. You have to understand, media uses fear as a tool of control. Fear of strangers, fear of disease, fear of foods, fear of your body, and also fear of abuse or attack or shaming. The problem with what the media is doing is that they've been doing it for a very, very long time. And so we may look at the young and question their beliefs as they feel they are not fully matured. But the problem is far deeper than that, because their parents grew up with the same fears, and in some cases so did their grandparents, all fueled by the media. For decades, this fear has been filtered into society, and it has changed the way that people think, and also the way in which people behave. The World Wide Web was designed and built for the sharing of knowledge. It was always meant to be free, but it has been hijacked by big businesses, and they've unleashed the demons from the bottle, and all for the sake of revenues and sales. Most people do not realize that an advert is actually a subtle insult. And if you sit back and you watch, you can actually see it. You'll have companies that will be like, here, use this makeup, because the underlying statement there is, because you're not good looking enough. Fix that bad hair with this hair product, because, your hair's awful. You've gained too much weight, so try this new diet. Oh, you're way too big for that bikini. Stop eating so much. And you'll never attract a woman smelling like that. Use this deodorant or aftershave. And so on for 24 hours every single day, and it never stops. No one, compared to media, is good enough. No one is pretty enough. No one has the right hair. Nobody is the right size. Nobody fits the clothes. Nobody smells like everybody thinks they should. I mean, it's crazy, really. People, just something like deodorant, people think people should smell a certain way. And they only think that way because that's what media's taught them. If you do not smell like this, then your body's awful. That's the subtle insult. It is pervasive. It is toxic. Because media's not our friend. They're exactly like a different form of activist or pressure group, showing what benefits themselves. And it's detrimental to us, especially mentally. Look at the whole issue of nudity. which runs all the way through the Curio Chronicles. Naturism in the Curio Chronicles is normalized. Social media stamps all over what is normal, non-sexual behavior. They tell us our bodies are shameful. Just think about that. Literally, our own skin, our flesh, is something that we all should be ashamed of. Why do people swallow this garbage? Sadly, they do. And the skin we were born in that has grown with us and helps protect our vital organs somehow is so vile in the eyes of the media, it must be ridiculed and shamed and hidden always from view. What will they suggest next? That we all start showering dressed? It's one of many ways in which they have manipulated society and turned something quite ordinary and normal into something that's perverse, sexualized, and disgusting. But it's just the skin. We don't look at a horse and scream with panic, "Oh my God, there's a naked horse. Oh my God, there's naked cats and dogs on the street, and the birds are not wearing clothes." We're part of this universe, we're part of this world, and our normal human form, which, by the way, was quite acceptable right up until sort of the mid-Victorian era, is our naked form. Back in the 1600s, it was quite normal for courtiers to walk around with a breast exposed. That was normal. It was quite normal in medieval periods that when you had a bath, you invited all your friends around and you'd build a big circle of bathing tubs. And the minstrels would come in and play music while you all sat naked, being washed by your servants while food and wine was being served. It was a social event. Roman baths, social event. And yet somehow in this modern world where we're all supposed to be cultured, diverse and inclusive, the human body is the most terrifying thing you can look at. It's absolutely ridiculous. If I was to stand in the street and tell people to their actual faces, "Your body is awful and it's disgusting," I would get attacked, I would get shamed, I would get arrested by those who I offended. And yet every day on social media, people listen, they take note, and they just swallow it up, believing everything they're told, including their skin is shameful. As I just said, we talk about equality, we talk about inclusion and diversity, but it staggers me to know that there is actually one part of a woman's skin that is so vile and so disgusting we can never look upon it because it's sordid, and to show it is absolutely immoral. Now I talk obviously of the female nipple, the means to enhance the life of a child, for that is its actual function. And to be honest, having seen a few in my life, I can attest that they're not really that much different from men's. It's more kind of the function than the look that is the big difference. I find it absolutely astounding that a full female breast can be posted to all the platforms of social media, but only as long as the nipple is covered. And people in their millions all accept this. What the hell happened to female liberation? What happened to equality? Guys are fine. They can show their nipples all over the place. It doesn't matter. You can walk down the street with your shirt off. You can post pictures of yourself with your shirt off. Why are women falling for this insanity and allowing others to dictate the terms of their body and their lives? The simple truth is that bra sales are actually in their trillions every year, as are bikinis and the endless ways of hiding a boob. It's trillions of dollars of industry, which is designed to create fear so that women keep on spending and the profits for the shareholders keep rising. That's it. It's got nothing to do with shame, sex, or even health. Simply put, it's very profitable, and every woman alive is making a lot of very, very wealthy men's lives even better because they hold shares. and because women embrace the notion that their bodies are sinful. It is simply another form of controlled manipulation driven once again by fear, which creates situations where women become so afraid they become isolated and depressed, and they hide who they are out of shame rather than live free. They conform, living to the expectations of others. This kind of negative manipulation has become ingrained in the whole of the human psyche. And for those, who are wise to their tricks, who do not follow the trends and don't buy into this dogmatic media, well, they get shamed and bullied and have to listen to a chorus of "what will people say" from those who have no real understanding of the freedoms that they have forsaken to fit into a social narrative designed to keep them caged. Those 4 words, "what will people say," have become a cage in which a great deal of society is now being imprisoned, and the idea of conformity has been reinforced with endless new trends, and for those who do not follow them, it leads to violence, bullying, isolation, and depression, and people then start to live in complete fear. The worst thing of all is it has driven a very Puritan narrative that has been indoctrinated into every one of us, and the message it gives is fear everything, do nothing, and stop living on your own terms. I will ask, honestly, if you're surrounded by people like that, how can you live in the moment and not be shamed? What is really scary is this sort of messaging is now riddled throughout all of society, who have embraced levels of conformity my generation thought was not even possible. I really do believe that Gen X are the only people left who really understand the true value of freedom, and even now in our 50s and 60s, we're still the biggest rebels alive today, living from one moment to the next. Life is no longer about the value of a life well lived. It's become about status, looks, and money. Edwin, Marjorie, and her shrew crew are actually in the majority view of today's world, and the Hatties, Ronnies, Birches, and Abbeys are the only strong-minded and free-thinking individuals who are left. Birch uses 2 words, and they have become the most powerful and dangerous words you can utter in today's words. And all she says is, be you. My dad is in his late 80s, and yet he is really well educated. He understands the value of critical thinking, and he's read all of the curios that I've published to date. When his stroke hit, if he'd followed society's lead, he would have made himself into a victim and sat wallowing in his misfortune. And yet he did not. He gritted his teeth, gave it all his best shot, and his recovery has been slow and agonizing as the frustration has been a huge challenge for him. But he's not given up. He's done everything he can to adapt, to improvise, and overcome his disability. And he has a long way to go, but he refuses to quit. I gotta tell you, I really admire my dad immensely, because even now he's still teaching me, and what I'm learning is other ways of how to survive and make the most of each moment, living in the now. Even so, it still surprised me that he brought up the topic of being present in each moment and making the most of every day. Both of us have worked in mental health in one fashion or another. And our conversations took the direction of today's modern world and how a great many have adopted an attitude that does embrace a sort of victimhood-like mentality. I know I've certainly seen a great deal of it, and within the curios, Abby more than most is prone to it at times as she sees the dark side in just about everything and struggles to find the positives. Her lack of confidence, overthinking, her insecurities are to a degree well-founded, because she did suffer at the hands of Martin Hinckley, and she survived an aggressive and abusive father. When she fails, it is in not realizing how good her life has become. And because she has lost herself in the past, she cannot see the brightness of her future, but sees only oncoming problems. Oh, I've seen so much of that in real life. Her inner strength is there to see, and just like my dad, she is a survivor. But unlike my dad, she's not capable of realizing how much her life has changed, as she slips into the negative of victimhood, which is like so many today. It's become their sort of comfort zone. My dad really understands that, and he's been able to a degree to mentally overcome a great deal of what has happened to him. I mean, he still gets frustrated, but he does not let it control him as Abby does. This is illustrated beautifully in Curious Christmas as Abby and Birch walk along the snow-covered canal, and we see the negative aspect of Abby's thoughts as she voices them to Birch. I like this, Birch. Just you and me alone talking like this. It feels special and important. I wanted this Christmas to be perfect for you, and so much has happened and gone wrong. Birch looked up at the trees. We have a beautifully decorated house. I love walking up the stairs. To be honest, I never want to take them down. Our Christmas tree is the prettiest I've ever seen, and our house looks so pretty dressed in lights. All of us are together and happy, and it has snowed, and that's made everything extra pretty. Oh, sweetie, it's already perfect. You always worry too much. We've always had people trying to put us down. Did you think that would stop because it's Christmas? Deads, ignore them. They're never going to be as open-minded and free-thinking as we are. And that is why they hate us. We have the courage to live as we choose. They don't. I think this Christmas has been perfect so far. The most wonderful thing about this moment between Birch and Abby is it does highlight the main difference between the two of them. Abby is stuck in the negative and cannot see further than the darkness. She fears stepping out of her comfort zone, and so only can see what has gone wrong. Whereas Birch, as we can clearly see, she's living in the moment, taking note of each second of wonder. And she has no problems at all recognizing everything that has gone right. Birch knows that when you step out of your comfort zone, that is when you are truly living in each moment. And throughout the whole of the Curio Chronicles, we see that is her pulling Abby into the light. And as a result, Abby is living for the first time in her life, and she is exceedingly happy. Today's society breeds negativity, and the young have embraced it in ways I never thought was possible. Now, on the upside, depending on where you are in life, pretty much most of life now has to a degree been sexualized. It's hard now to look at anything and not see how it has been spiced up with additional flesh exposed or some form of sexual innuendo. Most movies do not just contain nudity, they also show enacted sex scenes that have become so realistic at times it really is hard to wonder if you're not actually watching some form of soft porn. Now, the older generations, they see this and they frown because, they do not agree with it. It was not like that in their day. And that is another layer added to the generational divides between our old and our young. It's not hard to see where the Marjories come from. And yet, as we see in the Curios, some of it is quite hypocritical. Marjorie was actually young once, and as her husband tells Abby at the end of book 3, She was not always that way. She was once fun. Marjorie was young once, and probably for a time she too lived in the moment. So much so, she entered into an arrangement that allowed her husband to attend his club. And so one has to ask, what changed? I've never written her side of things. I deliberately left it out. But the fact remains she was once open-minded and accepting enough to allow her husband to cater to his own vice. The Marjorie that we know from the books is much older and a very changed person as she patrols the village, scowling at strangers and jumping to the wrong conclusions about every young person she meets. I have to speculate with all of you here and maybe suggest something happened, and as a consequence she was unable to let go of it, and as a result it changed her forever and left her always looking on the dark side, seeing the worst in people. Now, if you think about it, that is not unsimilar to young Abigail, living at home in Wootton Dursley, going through her own inner hell, doing her best to make it through another day. One has to wonder, if Abby did not meet Birch, would she end up the same as Madge, walking around scowling at people as she ran the ruling council like a younger, smaller version of her mother Felicity? I've worked with a good number of people who have suffered abuse, and also many who have been deeply hurt by shame. All of those people wanted to overcome the challenges that they faced in life. And some of their efforts, I used with Abby in the writing of this series. Then they're kind of like the others, friends and acquaintances who claim victimhood, quote mental health issues as a form of attention seeking, which they use to great effect to get validation and attention, which they've learned really from the media, especially from social media. Many of those types that I know, they're kind of like under 30. And I did spend a lot of time, and have in the past worked with these people, trying to talk them through their problems and offer them ways in which they can overcome the problems that they were facing. And yet, they chose to ignore me and do nothing, and use their preconceived notions of victimhood to blame every mistake and every problem that they've made in their lives. My dad commented to me that how when he was younger, people had little choice. They were forced to move forward and deal with their troubles as just a part of ordinary everyday life. They did not have the luxury of a time to wallow in pity. They had to step up to the plate and get things done, because that was how life was back then. And it's clear that today that is very much not the case. People become offended by the slightest little thing and then need safe spaces in order to recover. And I can only really speculate, but I have to ask, just what exactly will the future look like then? Does the future of the human race hold a time where every town, village and city will be ruled by the likes of Marjorie, where the whole community falls into line and blind obedience out of fear of shame? Will that be the new norm? Will we see a world free of people like Birch and, Curio-like characters, with no one to make a stand and challenge the narrative of what is wrong and immoral, and then live simply in the moment? Curio Summer, to a degree, shows how bad things can get. Single-handedly, Marjorie exercises her power and authority to the village against the Curios, with devastating effects. For those in the village, it is quite terrifying as they hide behind closed doors, out of the fear of being involved and shamed even more. Marion, who greatly fears Madge, does not actually agree with what she is doing, and in secret she tries to warn Abby. And yet, she does very, very little to actually help her. I think this is the start of yet another aspect of Abby's life. It's one that will see her begin to fight for who she really is, as she is empowered by Birch. And it's actually in defense of Birch that she steps up to the plate and makes her first ever stand. It's a scary moment for her, but it's also a clear sign that she's moving out of victimhood and doing her best to overcome the fears of the past. When she does, she finds she's not quite as alone or afraid as she's always thought she was, because the Curials stand with her and back her up to show the village there are some who will fight for them. It's a defining moment for Abby, and it's one that I really wanted to write into the story to show others that it's actually alright to make a stand for you. And at times, you may have to do it alone. And maybe that is why my dad enjoyed the story so much. I think it was something that he really understood from his own life. During the training of a counsellor, they learn that most people who enter therapy already know the cure. They're aware of what the solution is. They're just too afraid to face it alone and claim that moment of power for themselves. I mean, that is the duty of a counsellor. It is to walk beside them on the journey until they reach the outcome that they actually desire. Now, I show this very clearly in the Curial Chronicles, where Birch, in a sense, guides all of them by showing them how to reclaim the truth of themselves and start to live in the moment. Life is a fragile balance. I mean, it always has been, as was clearly demonstrated when my dad, who has always been very fit and active, out of nowhere suddenly had a stroke. I mean, it really was a wake-up call, not just to him, but me also. Yes, we both realised how precious each moment we have together actually is. There are so many people in this world today living in blind belief of what is a false and manipulated narrative, which is perpetuated by the media and big business. And it is so powerful, it's enslaving society and teaching our young not to question, not to believe in themselves, but trust others and blindly, allow them to guide them. And it's so wrong, because what we should be teaching our kids is how to know who they are, how to understand their own emotions, and how to step out of their comfort zones and actually experience real living life in the moment. My dad was right. We do need to really take a step back and look at things and do our best to understand who we really are. And then, by being ourselves, we can focus and start to live in the moment and enjoy life to its fullest. I mean, after all, as Birch often reminds us, we only get one trip in this life. So just live and forget what others think and say. Be you. I must admit, as I sit here now, it's kind of ironic, because in order to do this podcast, I had to really, really step out of my comfort zone and take a risk, which I have done in the things that I've recorded. It's not been an easy experience for me because I had so much to learn, but it's also been a great experience. I've really, really enjoyed making these podcasts. If you've all been listening all the way through this to this moment, then you have my absolute gratitude, and I really do. Thank you very, very much for tuning in and listening in. If you've enjoyed it and you've enjoyed some of the other things that I've recorded, please just look below the video and like and subscribe, because it does really help me get the word out there, and I'm hoping I can attract other writers, other readers, and other people who just basically nosy enough to come and have a peep, to come along and have a listen. I'll be back next week with something else to sort of twist your minds around with, and hopefully give you something that will inspire you to write, or inspire you to read more. Until next week, thank you very, very much for tuning in, and I will see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.